Silence is supposed to be empty. That's what we're told. But anyone who has spent a night in the deep, forgotten places of the world knows the truth. Silence is heavy. Silence is patient. And sometimes, silence speaks back. It was 1993. I was young, broke, and looking for easy money guarding a flooded hole in the ground in Pennsylvania called Black Hollow. I thought the job was simple. Sit in a booth, listen to my Walkman, and keep kids out. I was wrong. There were rules left for me. Weird rules. Don't shine your light in the water. Run if the echo changes pitch. I laughed them off. But I learned the hard way that in Black Hollow, the physics of sound and reality don't apply. What happened down there wasn't a ghost story. It was something older, something that listened to me, learned from me, and then tried to become me. My name is Jack Vance. At least I think it is, because after that night, after what I did to survive, I'm still not sure if the man telling you this story is the same one who went down into the pit. To this day, I have no answer. That's the sentence I wake up with, sweating in the dark 30 years later. I have theories, I have nightmares, but I don't have an answer. It was October 1993. The world was different then. It was quieter. There were no smartphones to light up the dark, no instant connection to the outside world. If you were in trouble, you were alone. And in the Rust Belt of Pennsylvania, where the economy was dying a slow, grinding death, being alone was just a part of life. My name is Jack Vance. Back then, I was 23, a college dropout with a beat-up Ford Bronco and a bank account that hovered in the single digits. I wasn't looking for a career. I was looking for gas money. That's how I found the ad in the back of a local paper, circled in red ink by my landlord. Night watchman needed. Black Hollow Quarry. Cash paid weekly. Must have own transport. No questions. It sounded like easy money. Sit in a booth, read a book, listen to my Walkman, and get paid to do nothing. I drove out there on a Tuesday afternoon to meet the foreman. The drive took me 40 minutes out of town, past the paved roads, onto gravel tracks that wound through dense, dying forests. The trees were stripped bare by autumn, looking like skeletal fingers clawing at the grey sky. When I finally crested the hill and saw Black Hollow, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a quarry, it was a wound, a massive, gaping scar in the earth, easily half a mile wide. The mining operations had ceased in the 50s after a structural failure, local code for a collapse that killed a dozen men, and the pit had flooded. Now it was a deep, stagnant lake of black water, surrounded by sheer cliffs of jagged slate that rose 300 feet into the air. The foreman, a man named Kowalski, was waiting for me by a rusted chain-link gate. He looked like he was made of the same slate as the quarry, grey, hard, and cracked. "You Vance?" he grunted, spitting tobacco juice onto the gravel. "Yeah, I'm here for the night shift." He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing. "You got a flashlight? Warm coat? It gets colder than a witch's tit down in the bowl." "I'm good," I lied. My coat was denim, hardly enough for a Pennsylvania October night. He unlocked the gate and waved me through. We drove down a steep, winding access road that hugged the cliff wall, descending into the belly of the beast. As we went lower, the light faded. The high walls blocked out the late afternoon sun, casting the bottom of the quarry into a premature twilight. The air changed too. It became heavy, damp, smelling of wet stone and stagnant water. The guard booth was a small, corrugated metal shack, perched on a flat plateau of rock, about 50 feet above the water level. It looked like a stiff breeze would knock it into the black depths below. "Generators round back," Kowalski said, pointing to a noisy, sputtering machine. "Keep it running. Powers the floodlight and the heater. If it dies, you're in the dark. You don't want to be in the dark down here." He handed me a heavy ring of keys and a walkie-talkie that looked like a brick. "Channel 4 is the base, but don't expect much reception. The rock walls mess with the signal." "So, what am I guarding exactly?" I asked, looking around. There was nothing but rusted machinery, old crushers, conveyor belts, twisted excavators. half submerged in the water or rotting on the shore. Who's going to steal a rusty tractor? Kowalski didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He leaned in close, his face serious. Kids come down here to drink. Daredevils try to dive off the cliffs. We had a drowner 2 years back. Liability. Just keep 'em out. He turned to leave, climbing back into his truck. Then he paused, as if he'd forgotten something, or debated whether to tell me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded, grease-stained piece of notebook paper. The guy before you. Miller. He left this. Said it was important. Kowalski shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Miller was a bit eccentric, but I told him I'd pass it on. He shoved the paper into my hand, got in his truck, and drove away. The sound of his engine faded as he climbed the access road, leaving me in a silence so profound it felt heavy. I was alone. I walked into the booth. It was sparse. A metal desk, a folding chair, a small propane heater, and a window overlooking the black water. I set my backpack down and unfolded the note Kowalski had given me. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. Rules for the hollow. Keep the floodlight aimed at the gate, not the water. If you hear digging sounds, turn up your radio. Do not investigate. Do not shine your flashlight into the water after 3 a.m. The acoustics are bad. If the echo answers back in a different pitch, run to the car and leave. I chuckled, shaking my head. Okay, Miller, I muttered, trying to scare the new guy. I crumbled the note and tossed it onto the desk. I wasn't superstitious. I was a rational guy who needed a paycheck. I sat down, put on my headphones, and clicked play on my Walkman. Pearl Jam filled my ears, drowning out the silence. The first few hours were boring. The sun vanished completely, leaving the quarry in absolute pitch blackness, save for the single yellow cone of light from the booth's floodlight, which I had obediently aimed at the gate. Around 10 p.m., I took the headphones off to stretch. That's when I realized how loud the silence was. The quarry amplified everything. The wind whistling through the jagged slate sounded like flutes. The water lapping against the rocks sounded like wet slaps. I stepped outside to take a leak. The air was freezing. I looked out over the edge of the plateau, down toward the water. It was an abyss. I couldn't see the surface, just a void where the light didn't reach. Then, I heard it. Clang. It was distant, metallic, like a hammer striking rock. I froze, zipping up my jeans. "Hello?" I called out. "Private property!" My voice bounced off the cliff walls. Property, property, property. The echo faded. Then, clang. It came from the other side of the water, near the old, submerged crusher. "I said get out of here!" I yelled louder, grabbing my heavy Maglite flashlight. "Here, here, here." I waited for the silence to return, but it didn't. The echo of my own voice had faded. But a second later, a new sound drifted back from the darkness across the water. It was a voice. Faint, distorted by the distance and the stone, but undeniable. It mimicked my cadence. It mimicked my tone. But the word wasn't here, near. I gripped the flashlight, my knuckles turning white. I told myself it was acoustic pareidolia, my brain making words out of wind and scraping metal. But deep down, in the primal part of my brain that remembered when we were prey, I knew. That wasn't the wind. I looked at my watch. 10:15 p.m. I looked at the crumpled note on the desk. Rule number 4. If the echo answers back in a different pitch. I wasn't running yet, but for the first time in my life, I was afraid of the dark. Fear is a funny thing. When it hits you, it's sharp and immediate. But when nothing happens, when the monster doesn't jump out, when the silence returns, fear curdles into something else. It becomes paranoia. I sat in that freezing metal booth, staring at the crumpled note on the desk. If the echo answers back in a different pitch, garbage, I whispered to myself. It's just physics. Sound waves hitting irregular surfaces. Doppler effect. Something. I tried to force rationality back into the driver's seat. I was Jack Vance, a guy who didn't believe in ghosts, Bigfoot, or haunted holes in the ground. I turned the volume up on my Walkman, letting Eddie Vedder scream into my ears, effectively sealing myself off from the outside world. For an hour, it worked. I read a paperback I'd brought, checking the time every few minutes. 11:30 p.m., 11:45 p.m. The generator hummed its steady, petrol-scented lullaby behind the shack. The floodlight cut a static yellow cone through the darkness, illuminating the rusted chain-link gate and nothing else. Then the generator sputtered. The lights in the booth flickered. The heater groaned and died. The floodlight outside dimmed to a sickly orange glow, then winked out completely. Complete, suffocating darkness slammed into the quarry. "Oh, come on," I groaned, taking off my headphones. The silence rushed back in, eager to fill the space. I grabbed the heavy maglite. I had to go out there. The generator was behind the booth, nestled against the rock face. It was probably just a clogged fuel line or a spark plug acting up. Kowalski had said it was temperamental. I stepped out of the booth, the beam of my flashlight cutting a narrow, dusty path through the night. The air was colder now, a damp chill that seemed to seep up from the black water below. I could smell it. A mix of sulfur, rotting leaves, and something metallic, like old pennies. I walked around to the back of the shack. The generator sat there, silent. I kicked it gently. Piece of junk. I set the flashlight on a flat rock, aiming it at the engine, and started checking the choke. It took me about 5 minutes to get it primed. I grabbed the pull cord and gave it a hard yank. Put. Die. Damn it. I yanked it again, and again. On the fourth try, it roared to life, coughing out a cloud of blue smoke. The floodlight snapped back on, blindingly bright, casting long, dancing shadows against the cliff walls. I let out a breath of relief, wiping grease on my jeans. I turned to grab my flashlight. That's when I heard the digging. It wasn't the metallic clang from earlier. This was a wet, rhythmic sound. Schlock, thud, schlock, thud, like a shovel biting into wet, heavy clay. It was coming from below, near the water's edge. I froze. My hand hovered over the flashlight. I remembered rule number 2. If you hear digging sounds, turn up your radio. Do not investigate. But I was the guard. If kids were down there digging for geodes or fossils, it was my job to run them off. And honestly, the idea of people being down here, even trespassing teenagers, was more comforting than the idea of being alone. "Hey!" I shouted, grabbing the light and walking to the edge of the plateau. I swept the beam down toward the shoreline, 50 feet below. "I can hear you. Police are on the way." I waited for the echo. Wait. Normal. My voice bounced off the far wall and faded, but the digging didn't stop. Schlock. Thud. It actually got louder, faster. I swept the beam frantically over the jumble of rocks and rusted machinery at the water's edge. The light caught the jagged teeth of an old excavator, the rotted remains of a wooden dock, and piles of slate debris. Nothing moved. "I see you," I lied, my voice cracking slightly. I stopped and listened. Silence. The digging stopped instantly. Then my echo came back, but it didn't come from the far wall, and it didn't come immediately. I stood there for a full 5 seconds. Silence. I lowered the flashlight, confused. Had the physics of the quarry just eaten the sound? Then, from the darkness directly below me, rising up from the water, came my voice. "I see you." It was my voice. But it wasn't an echo. An echo is a decay, a fading copy. This was loud, clear, and the tone. It wasn't my fearful cracking shout. It was flat, dead, monotone, like someone playing a recording of me, but stripping away the emotion. I stumbled back from the edge, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. That wasn't physics. That was impossible. I scrambled back into the booth and slammed the door, locking the flimsy handle. I backed up against the file cabinet, breathing hard. Rule number 4. If the echo answers back in a different pitch, run, I whispered. But run where? The access road was a mile long, uphill, in the dark. My Bronco was parked right next to the booth. But if I left, I'd lose the job. I needed the money. I needed it. It's a prank, I told myself, trembling. Someone is down there with a tape recorder, some local kids messing with the new guy. I looked at the clock. 12:33 a.m. I sat at the desk, my eyes fixed on the dark window. I didn't put my headphones back on. I couldn't. I needed to hear them if they came up the path. For an hour, nothing happened. Just the wind and the hum of the generator. Then, at 1:45 a.m., the walkie-talkie on the desk, the one Kowalski said barely worked, crackled to life. I jumped, knocking my coffee mug onto the floor. It shattered. Crash. The sound was deafening in the small booth. The radio crackled again. Static. Thick white noise. And then a voice. Not Kowalski. Not the dispatcher. It was a voice that sounded like it was gargling gravel. Jack! I stared at the black brick of plastic. I hadn't told anyone my first name. Kowalski only called me Vance. The ad just said Watchman. I reached out, my hand shaking so bad I could barely press the button. Who is this? I demanded. The static hissed. Then the voice returned. But it wasn't coming from the radio anymore. The static was coming from the radio. The voice was coming from the broken coffee mug on the floor. The shards of ceramic vibrated against the metal floor tiles, and from the jagged pieces, a tiny, tinny acoustic reflection rose up, delayed by seconds. Who is this? It mimicked me perfectly. But then, the pieces of the mug rattled again, and the echo continued, adding words I hadn't spoken. Who is this? Jack Vance. I pulled my feet up onto the chair, staring at the broken ceramic in horror. The quarry wasn't just echoing the air, it was echoing the objects. The vibration was trapped in the matter itself, storing the sound and releasing it with additions. And then I realized something terrifying. The coffee mug had shattered inside the booth. The windows were closed. Whatever was manipulating the sound, it wasn't just down in the pit, it was in the room with me. I sat on that folding chair with my knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the ceramic shards of the coffee mug, as if they were radioactive isotopes. They lay scattered on the metal floor, silent now, but the silence felt heavy, pregnant. It felt like the pause between a lightning flash and the thunder. The booth was a cage. The windows, black squares reflecting my own pale, terrified face, felt less like barriers keeping the night out, and more like the glass walls of an aquarium. And I was the fish. Time seemed to stretch. The second hand on the cheap plastic wall clock ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. I needed to get out. I needed to get to my Bronco and drive until the gas tank was dry. Screw the money. Screw the landlord. I slowly lowered my boots to the floor, avoiding the ceramic shrapnel. I stood up, my muscles coiled tight. I reached for the door handle. Click. I froze. My hand was 2 inches from the metal latch. I hadn't touched it yet, but the sound, the distinct metallic click of the latch depressing, had just come from the door. I pulled my hand back as if the handle were red hot. What? I breathed. What? The echo came instantly, not from the quarry walls outside, and not from the floor. It came from the air right in front of my face, and it wasn't delayed. It was instantaneous, overlapping my own voice perfectly. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I decided to test it. I would say the word stop. I took a breath. I formed the thought. I sent the signal from my brain to my stop. The word hung in the air. My mouth hadn't opened. I reeled back, stumbling against the desk. The voice was mine, unmistakably mine, but it had spoken for me. It had spoken before me. The acoustic delay was gone. It had reversed. The quarry wasn't echoing the past anymore. It was echoing the immediate future. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of confusion. If it knew what I was going to say, it knew what I was thinking. It was in my head. I grabbed the walkie-talkie. I didn't care about the static. I didn't care about the creepy voices. I needed to hear a human being. I needed linear time. I mashed the button down. Kowalski, pick up. There's someone. There's something out here. Static. Then a voice cut through. Not Kowalski. Run. It was my voice, but it sounded breathless, exhausted, like I had been running for miles. Jack, the water... It's coming. I dropped the radio. Shut up! I screamed at the plastic brick. Shut up! The walls screamed back, a millisecond before the sound left my lips. I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. Get out of my head! Get out of my head! It was a feedback loop. My thoughts were being broadcast, amplified, and thrown back at me before I could process them. I was losing the boundary between my mind and the stone pit. I looked at the clock. 2:58 a.m. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Rule Mura 3. Do not shine your light into the water after 3 a.m. Why? Why specifically 3 a.m.? The anticipation of the hour became a physical weight. The second hand ticked. Tick, tick. 2:59 a.m. I found myself staring at the window. The floodlight outside was still on, casting its yellow cone toward the gate. But beyond that cone, the darkness of the pit was absolute. The reversed echo had stopped. The booth was silent again. The radio was dead. But the air pressure changed. My ears popped. It felt like being in an airplane descending rapidly. The smell of the quarry, that sulfur and rot, intensified, seeping through the seals of the door. 3 a.m. The second hand hit the 12. Immediately, the floodlight outside died. I didn't touch the generator. It didn't sputter. The bulb just cut out, as if a switch had been thrown. I was plunged into total darkness. No, I whimpered. I fumbled for my maglite on the desk. My fingers brushed the cold metal. I grabbed it. My thumb hovered over the switch. Do not shine your light into the water. But I was in the dark. I was blind. I had to see. What if someone was climbing the stairs to the booth? What if the thing that made the digging sounds was at the door? I clicked the flashlight on. The beam cut through the dusty air of the booth. I didn't aim it at the window. I aimed it at the door. Locked. I aimed it at the floor. The ceramic shards were still there. Then I heard the sound. It wasn't a dig. It wasn't a clang. It was a slosh. A heavy, wet displacement of water. And it sounded close. Too close. The booth was 50 feet above the water level. I moved to the window, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew I shouldn't. The rule was clear, but the sound was impossible to ignore. It sounded like the waves were lapping against the base of the booth. I pressed my face to the cold glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the reflection. I couldn't see anything in the pitch black. I raised the flashlight. Don't do it, Jack. I hesitated. Slosh. It was right below me. I couldn't help it. The survival instinct demanded visual confirmation. I tilted the flashlight beam down, through the glass, aiming it into the abyss below. The beam sliced through the darkness. It didn't travel 50 feet. It traveled 5. The water. The black, oily water of the quarry hadn't just risen. It had swollen. It was bulging upward, defying gravity, a massive dark meniscus rising silently toward the plateau like a rising tide in a nightmare. And floating just under the surface of that rising black water, illuminated by my trembling beam, was something pale. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't a rock. I leaned closer, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The pale shape drifted upward, breaking the surface. It was a face. It was wet, bloated, and blue-lipped. Its hair was plastered to its skull. But I recognized it. It was Miller, the previous guard, the one who wrote the note. His eyes were wide open, staring straight up at me. and as the light hit his dead retinas, his mouth opened. He didn't speak. Instead, the radio on the desk behind me clicked on, and Miller's voice, wet and gurgling, came out of the speaker. "I told you not to look." The voice coming from the radio wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It was intimate, wet, and terrifyingly calm. "I told you not to look." I scrambled backward, kicking the desk, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the window. The maglite rolled across the floor, its beams spinning wildly, creating a strobe effect that illuminated the cramped booth in chaotic flashes. Flash, the metal walls. Flash, the dead heater. Flash, the black window pressed against the night. "You're dead," I stammered, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the claustrophobic space. "Miller is dead. This is a trick." The radio didn't answer. Instead, the booth groaned. It was a deep, structural complaint of metal under stress. The floor tilted beneath my feet, throwing me off balance. I grabbed the edge of the file cabinet to steady myself. The booth was built on steel stilts driven into the rock plateau, 50 feet above the waterline. Or at least it had been. Now I could hear the water. Slap, slap, slap. It wasn't 50 feet down. It was right underneath the floorboards. The water had risen 50 feet in a matter of minutes. That was impossible. That defied every law of hydrology. A quarry that size would need a torrential flood of biblical proportions to fill that fast. Unless the water wasn't filling the space. Unless the water was expanding. I grabbed the keys to the Bronco from the desk. My hand swept the walkie-talkie into my pocket. Pure instinct, though I didn't know why I kept the cursed thing. I had to get out. If the water kept rising, this metal box would be my coffin. I lunged for the door, unlocking the deadbolt with trembling fingers. I threw it open. I expected wind. I expected the biting cold of October. What hit me was a wave of heat. It was a humid, rotting warmth, smelling of stagnant mud and ancient, decaying biology. It hit my face like the breath of a sleeping animal. I shined the flashlight out. The plateau was gone. The rocky outcrop where my Bronco was parked was now an island, surrounded by a churning, viscous sea of black sludge. The water was only inches from the tires of my truck. And the water, it wasn't moving like water. I froze in the doorway, the flashlight beam cutting across the surface. The surface of the quarry wasn't rippling with waves. It was heaving. The entire black expanse was rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Inhale, exhale, the rise, the fall. The quarry was breathing. It wasn't a flooded pit. It was a lung, a massive, fluid lung, inhaling the night air and exhaling that warm, rot-scented mist. Oh God, oh God, God, God. The echo returned, but this time it didn't come from the walls. It rippled across the surface of the black slime. I saw the vibrations of my own voice travel through the viscous liquid, forming geometric patterns that glowed with a faint, bioluminescent phosphorescence. The water was reacting to the sound. It was listening. I had to get to the truck. It was 10 feet away. 10 feet of slick, wet rock between the booth and the driver's side door. I ran. My boots slipped on the slate, coated in a thin layer of the black slime that had already breached the perimeter. I slammed into the side of the Bronco, jamming the key into the lock. Schlock. A sound behind me, heavy, wet. I didn't look. I twisted the key, yanked the door open, and threw myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Safe, steel and glass, American engineering. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. Click. Silence. No crank. No sputtering engine. Just the dead, heavy silence of a battery that had been drained dry. "No, no, no!" I screamed, pounding the steering wheel. "Start! You piece of junk! Start! 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 Start!" The echo mocked me from outside. I tried the headlights. Nothing. I tried the dome light. Dead. The truck was a brick. I looked out the windshield. The water was higher now. It had swallowed the bumper. It was creeping up the hood. And as it touched the metal of the car, it didn't splash. It climbed. It moved with intent, tendrils of black ooze reaching up the grille like fingers. I was trapped. Then the walkie-talkie in my pocket buzzed. Not a static crackle, but a vibration. I pulled it out. The red power light was dim, fading. "Jack!" It was Miller's voice again. But this time, it was overlaid with another voice. A younger voice. My voice. "Don't look at the passenger seat." My blood turned to ice. I was alone in the car. I knew I was alone. I had just jumped in. I had locked the doors. But the space inside the Bronco suddenly felt smaller. The air grew heavier, charged with that same metallic static I had felt in the booth. I gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the rising black slime on the hood. I refused to turn my head. Don't look. Don't look. But in the corner of my eye, in the periphery of my vision, I saw a shape. A dark, sodden mass sitting in the passenger seat next to me, dripping wet, smelling of the deep earth. I could hear it breathing. A wet, rattling rasp that matched the rhythm of the heaving quarry outside. Rah, rah. "You're not real," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "It's the stress. It's the acoustics." The figure in the passenger seat shifted. The leather creaked. And then a cold, wet hand placed itself on my right shoulder. It wasn't a ghostly touch. It was heavy, solid, and it squeezed. The hand on my shoulder was heavy, like a sandbag soaked in ice water. It didn't feel like flesh and bone. It felt dense, pliable, and impossibly cold. The cold didn't stay on the surface of my jacket. It radiated inward, seeking the warmth of my blood, numbing the nerves in my arm. I couldn't breathe. The air in the Bronco had become thick, tasting of copper and ozone. Don't look. If you look, it becomes real. But the grip tightened. It wasn't a grasp of aggression, but of possession. It was the way a sculptor holds a block of clay before the first cut. Slowly, trembling so violently the keys rattled in the ignition, I turned my head. The maglite, resting on my lap, cast a chaotic underlighting onto the passenger seat. It was Miller. Or rather, it was the idea of Miller. The figure wore the faded grey security uniform I had seen hanging in the locker. It had the general shape of a man, broad shoulders, a slump in the posture. But the details were wrong. The fabric of the shirt looked wet and slick, merged with the skin of the neck. There were no buttons, just bumps of flesh-coloured matter. And the face. It was a face in transition. The skin was pale, bloated, and blue-tinged, like the corpse I had seen in the water. The eyes were wide, staring, milky white. But as I watched, paralyzed by a terror that went beyond screaming, the face moved. Not a muscle twitch, but a shifting of mass. The cheekbones sharpened, the jawline squared. The milky whiteness of the eyes began to swirl, darkening, forming an iris, a hazel iris, my iris. The thing opened its mouth. A strand of thick black saliva bridged the gap between its lips. "Jack," it whispered. But it wasn't the radio speaking. It was the thing itself. And the voice wasn't Miller's gravelly rasp anymore. It was my voice. It was the sound of my own throat, stripped of fear, stripped of soul. "What are you?" I choked out, shrinking against the driver's side door. The thing leaned closer. The smell of it was overpowering. Wet slate, diesel, and old blood. "I am the resonance," it said. The lips moved out of sync with the words, like a badly dubbed movie. "I am the space between the sound." Its hand moved from my shoulder to my neck. The thumb pressed against my pulse point. It was checking my rhythm, learning my beat. "Your heart is fast," it observed, my voice sounding curious, clinical. "Too fast. I can fix that." It lunged. The movement was a blur of wet motion. I didn't think, I reacted. The survival instinct, dormant in the face of the supernatural, finally kicked in. I swung the heavy maglite with both hands. Thwack! The metal flashlight connected with the side of its head. It didn't sound like hitting a skull. There was no crack of bone. It sounded like hitting a bucket of wet mud. Splat. The force of the blow caved the creature's head in. The face, the half-Miller, half-Jack visage, distorted violently. The eye I had hit didn't bruise. It simply slid down the cheek, dissolving into the jaw. The skin tore, revealing not bone or brain, but a thick, black, viscous sludge. The same sludge that was outside the car. The creature didn't scream. It didn't bleed. It just rippled. It lunged again, its fingers, now elongated and dripping, clawing at my face. It wasn't trying to strangle me. It was trying to smear itself onto me. It wanted to merge. "Get off me!" I roared, kicking out with my boots. I caught it in the chest. My foot sank into its torso as if I were kicking a swamp. I pushed hard, bracing my back against the door. The creature was heavy, but fluid. It splashed back against the passenger door, its form losing cohesion. The Miller disguise was failing. The uniform melted away into the black ooze. The face was gone, replaced by a smooth, blank oval of slate-colored muck. But it was still moving, reforming, rising. I grabbed the door handle. Locked. Jammed. The pressure outside was too great. The windshield, the black lung outside, had risen halfway up the glass. The pressure was immense. I turned in the seat, put my back against the steering wheel, and kicked the windshield with both feet. Once. Twice. Crack. A spiderweb fracture bloomed in the glass. The creature in the passenger seat, now just a roiling humanoid shape of black slime, reached for my ankle. Its grip was stronger now. It burned like dry ice. "No!" I screamed. I kicked the glass again. Crash! The safety glass shattered inward. Immediately, the nightmare rushed in. The black sludge from the quarry poured through the broken windshield like a dam breaking. It wasn't just water. It was heavy, thick, and warm. It filled the dashboard, the floorboards, swamping my legs. But the influx of fluid did one thing. It equalized the pressure. I grabbed the door handle again and shoved. It groaned, fought against the muck outside, and then popped open. I tumbled out of the Bronco, splashing into the knee-deep ooze that covered the plateau. The cold air hit me, but it wasn't relief. I stood up, gasping, covered in the black slime. The floodlight from the booth was gone. The only light came from the moon, which had finally broken through the clouds, casting a pale, silvery glow over the quarry. I looked back at the Bronco. The interior was full. The black liquid swirled inside. And rising from the driver's seat, the seat I had just vacated, was a shape. It wasn't the mud creature. It wasn't Miller. As the moonlight hit the figure climbing out of my truck, I stopped breathing. It was me. It was Jack Vance. It was wearing my denim jacket. It had my hair. It had my face. It moved with my gait. The duplicate stood by the open door of the truck, the black water dripping from its clothes. It looked at its hands, flexing the fingers, testing the joints. Then, it slowly lifted its head and looked directly at me. It smiled. A cold, dead smile that didn't reach the eyes. And then, it spoke. Not with an echo, not with a delay. "Finally," it said, in a voice that was more mine than my own. "I was getting tired of the dark. There is a specific kind of madness that comes from looking into your own eyes and seeing a stranger staring back. The thing standing by the flooded Bronco wasn't a reflection. It was solid. It cast a shadow. It was wearing my clothes, which were soaked and clinging to its frame. It stood with my slouch, my hands buried in the pockets of my jacket. Finally, it had said. I didn't scream. Screaming requires breath, and my lungs were paralyzed. I didn't fight. Fighting requires hope. And in that moment, seeing my own face sneer at me under the moonlight, hope was a foreign concept. I ran. It was a clumsy, desperate scramble. I turned away from the duplicate and threw myself toward the access road, the steep gravel track that wound up the cliff face toward the gate and the real world. The plateau was knee-deep in the black ooze. It wasn't water anymore. It was a thick, sucking gel. Every step was a war. Squelch, suck, drag. The quarry didn't want me to leave. It held onto my boots, heavy and possessive. Behind me, I didn't hear running footsteps. I didn't hear the frantic splash of a chase. I heard whistling. It was a casual, jaunty tune. Pearl Jam. Black, the song I had been listening to earlier. The duplicate was whistling it perfectly, but the sound was wrong. It was being amplified by the quarry walls, bouncing from every angle. The whistle came from the left, the right, from above me. It sounded like 1,000 versions of me were surrounding the pit, whistling a funeral dirge. I hit the start of the incline. The gravel was loose, slick with the mist. I clawed my way up, my fingernails digging into the sharp stones, tearing the skin. I didn't care. Pain was good. Pain meant I was still the original. "Jack!" The voice boomed around me. It wasn't shouting. It was conversational, yet deafening. "Where are you going? You're broke. You're tired. You have nothing up there." I stumbled, skinning my knee on a jagged piece of slate. I dared to look back. The duplicate hadn't moved from the car. It was just standing there, watching me. But as I watched, it raised a hand and pointed a finger at me. The black slime around my legs suddenly hardened. It shifted from liquid to solid in a heartbeat. My shins were encased in stone. I pitched forward, slamming my chest into the gravel road. The wind knocked out of me. I kicked, screamed, dragging my body. The grip was like a vice. Down below, the duplicate began to walk. It didn't struggle with the mud. The slime parted for it like the Red Sea. It walked calmly toward the hill, its eyes fixed on me. "We don't need two of us, Jack," it called out, its voice vibrating in the rocks under my chest. And honestly, I'm built better. I don't get cold. I don't get scared. I remember everything. It was 10 yards away. I could see the moonlight glinting off its wet teeth. I remember everything. Suddenly, memories that weren't current flooded my mind. Not visuals, but sounds. The sound of my mother crying when I dropped out. The sound of the landlord threatening eviction. The sound of my own internal monologue. The self-hatred I kept buried. The creature was broadcasting my own shame back at me, using the acoustic anomaly of the quarry to weaponize my history. "Stop it!" I shrieked, grabbing a fistful of gravel. The duplicate reached the bottom of the incline. It started to climb. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its limbs bending slightly too far, like rubber. I thrashed, my panic overriding the pain. I twisted my leg, feeling a pop in my ankle, but the hardened mud cracked. I pulled free, leaving my left boot stuck in the solidification. One boot on, one boot off. I scrambled up the road on hands and knees. I was 50 feet up the cliff now. The duplicate was 20 feet behind me. "You can't outrun the echo, Jack," it laughed. A dry, rattling laugh. I saw a shape in the darkness ahead. The foreman's shed. No, it was an old rusted hopper, left over from the mining days, half buried in the cliffside. Beside it was a pile of old iron rebar. I lunged for the iron. My hand closed around a rusted heavy bar, about 2 feet long. I spun around, sitting on the gravel, raising the weapon. The duplicate was right there. It had closed the distance in silence. It stopped, looking at the rebar. It tilted its head, my head, to the side like a curious dog. "Violence?" it mocked. "You're going to hit yourself?" It lunged. I didn't swing at its head. I swung at its legs. Crunch. The iron bar connected with its shin. It didn't break bone. It went through. The leg severed like wet clay. The duplicate didn't scream. It looked down, surprised. Its lower leg dissolved into a puddle of black sludge, and it toppled forward. But as it fell, it grabbed me. Its hand closed around my ankle, the bare one. The cold was instantaneous. It wasn't just temperature, it was numbness. I couldn't feel my foot. I watched in horror as my skin began to turn grey where it touched me. The infection was spreading. It was trying to rewrite my biology. "Mine!" it hissed, crawling up my body, its form losing coherence, becoming a blob of aggressive, intelligent mud with my face on top. I kicked it with my booted foot. I slammed the iron bar into its back again and again. Splat, splat. "I am Jack Vance," I screamed, more to convince myself than it. I brought the sharp end of the rebar down into its neck. The creature shuddered. It looked at me, its hazel eyes, my eyes, wide with a sudden, terrible realization. "No," it gurgled. "If you go, who remembers?" The dark. It wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to be me so it could leave. It was lonely. It was an ancient, lonely consciousness trapped in a hole, desperate to walk in the sun. I didn't care. I twisted the bar. The creature dissolved. The face melted away, sliding off the skull like wax. The grip on my ankle loosened, turning back into lifeless, cold slime. I scrambled backward, panting, covered in sweat and the black residue of the thing that had worn my face. I stood up, limping on my frozen, grey-skinned foot. I didn't look back. I ran. I hobbled up that mile-long access road, the moonlight casting long, distorted shadows that looked too much like fingers reaching for me. I ran until I saw the chain-link gate. I ran until I collapsed on the other side, on the safe, dry asphalt of the county road. But even there, lying on my back, staring at the indifferent stars, I could hear it, faintly, drifting up from the deep, dark bowl of the earth, a whistling, Pearl Jam, black. It was finishing the song. I walked for 3 hours, one boot on, one boot off, limping along the shoulder of County Road 9. My bare foot, the one the creature had grabbed, was a dead weight. It didn't hurt. It didn't bleed on the asphalt. It just felt like a block of ice attached to my leg, numb and alien. Around 5 a.m., a trucker hauling timber slowed down. He didn't ask questions. He took one look at me, covered in drying black mud, shivering, with a face that looked like I'd seen the devil, and told me to hop in. I didn't tell him about the quarry. I didn't tell him about the rising black tide, or the man with my face who was dissolved by a rusted rebar. I told him I'd wrecked my truck and wandered off, dazed. It was a lie, but it was a lie that made sense in the real world. I never went back for the Bronco. I reported it stolen a week later. I let the bank take the insurance money. I let my landlord evict me. I left Pennsylvania with a duffel bag and a limp that I still have to this day. I spent a month in a hospital in Ohio. The doctors were baffled by my foot. They called it idiopathic neuropathy. The skin had turned a permanent slate-grey colour, from the ankle down to the toes. The nerves were dead, they said. Frostbite, they guessed, or some kind of chemical burn. They were wrong. It wasn't a burn. It was a conversion. I know what it is. I wake up some mornings and I can't feel my toes, but I can hear them. If I tap my grey foot against the floorboards, the sound is different. It's dull, dense, like tapping a stone. A piece of me, my flesh and bone, had been replaced by the quarry. I carry a piece of that pit with me, fused to my body. I'm 53 years old now. I live in a noisy apartment in Chicago. I like the city. I like the constant roar of the L train, the sirens, the shouting. I surround myself with noise. I can't stand silence. Because in the silence, I hear the delay. People ask about the title of my story. To this day, I have no answer. They assume I mean I don't know what the creature was, or why the quarry was alive. I don't care about those answers. I know what I saw. It was a mimic, a living geological predator that uses sound and memory to hunt. The answer I don't have is the one to the question I ask myself every time I look in the mirror. You see, memories are tricky things. Trauma fractures them. I remember hitting the creature. I remember running up the hill. I remember the cold. But sometimes the memories slip. I have dreams where I'm not the one running up the hill. I have dreams where I am the one lying in the gravel, my legs severed, watching a man limp away into the moonlight. I have dreams where I dissolve into the black sludge, feeling a terrible, aching loneliness, wishing I could be the one walking toward the lights of the county road. And then I wake up. I look at my grey, stone-like foot, and I wonder, did the real Jack Vance escape that night? Or was the mimic better than I thought? Did it absorb enough of my memories, enough of my fear, to believe it was Jack Vance? Did I kill the original and take his place so seamlessly that even I don't know I'm the monster? Is that why I can't stand echoes? Not because I'm afraid of them, but because I'm afraid they might reveal the truth? That my voice doesn't belong to a human soul anymore? I have no answer. But I know one thing. Last week I was humming in the shower, just a tune. Pearl Jam. Black. I stopped to rinse the soap from my eyes, and for a split second, in the tiled acoustics of the bathroom, the humming continued. It didn't echo. It finished the verse. It whistled the end of the song. I smashed the mirror that night. I haven't looked at my reflection since, because I'm terrified that one day I'll look into the glass and the eyes staring back won't be hazel. They'll be black, infinite, liquid, and full of stars. And the reflection will whisper, I remember everything. I don't go near quarries anymore. I don't go near deep water. And I certainly don't talk to myself when I'm alone, because I'm terrified that one day the silence will answer back. Sometimes I look at my grey foot, that piece of dead stone attached to my living body, and I wonder if it's a scar or a root connecting me to that black lung in Pennsylvania, feeding me memories that aren't mine. We all have echoes. We all have parts of ourselves we hide in the dark. Just make sure that when you look into the darkness, you know exactly who is looking back. Thank you for joining me on this shift. If the damp, acoustic horror of Black Hollow got under your skin, please subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. We have many more archives to open and more nightmares to share. Now, I have a question for you. Based on what you heard, do you think I made it out? Or am I just the echo telling the story? Let me know your theories in the comments. And, as always, tell us where in the world you are listening from. Sleep well. And if you hear humming in the shower, don't harmonize.